What is this, July?
July
of 2019. And today we have Kevin Marquette speaking about PowerShell modules. But before we start, I'd like to turn over the floor to our sponsor, who's always very kind in providing us food and a place to meet every week. So go ahead, take it away.
Hi, welcome PowerShell. We are Tech Systems. What we are, we're the leading IT services provider. So what we do is a lot of recruiting services, but it's not just locally here in Phoenix. We're all over the country and globally. So if you're ever looking for a job, chances are we're going to have an office by you. So this group PowerShell is here in Phoenix. So if you have any questions, please email me at brwillett. That's brwillett, W-I-L-L-E-T-T at texas.com. DEK Systems. Thank you guys and have a great PowerShell session.
Okay, Kevin, let's see. I think the floor is yours. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and mute. And if there's any questions in here, I'll do my best to unmute the phone so we can hear them. So just speak up. So for now, I'm going to go on mute.
All right, sounds good. So yeah, so welcome. Let's talk about getting started with PowerShell modules. So like I said, my name's Kevin Marquette. I'm a PowerShell MVP, conference speaker. I'm on a blog that's fairly popular about PowerShell. All the materials that I present today are actually up on my GitHub page. So we go to GitHub, and today we're doing my module presentation. I like posting my materials on GitHub. That gives you this nice, easy download as a zip file to get all the scripts that are current as of, well, changes I put in like 3 hours ago. So with that, let me jump into VS Code here. And let's see, does that size look good for you guys? If not, let me know. I'll just kind of continue on here.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how to get this in full screen on my end. Where is it? Right here?
Yeah, the one that looks like, oh, that's, never mind.
There we go, that's better. Oh, let me just mute it. Go ahead, Kevin.
All right, so modules, like they're supposed to like step in kind of where your packaging and collection of functions kind of leaves off. So I'm going to start with, the idea that you already know how to like build a function, and you're wanting, and maybe your functions are getting out of hand, and you kind of want to organize and like take them to the next level. So like in front of me, I've got a really simple function here. It's like here I've got it like inline in my script, where I might just have this function here for like getting info. If I scroll up a little bit here, this is a really simple one that's basically just doing a wmi command to get the BIOS info. Now I'm going to reuse this example multiple times because I'm mostly going to be focusing on the module side of things. So yeah, since I defined this in my session, I can literally just call the function with my parameters, and it exists in my environment here. So one of the first things you can start doing is moving your functions into like external files that you can literally just dot source. And dot sourcing is a way to like import external scripts into your current session. So let me just open up this file here real quick so you see what this guy looks like. And he's pretty much the same function. I've changed the name slightly and give it some verbose output so you can see when I'm loading different files. But otherwise, this is a pretty basic function. And the trick to dot sourcing is this little dot right here. I know it can be hard to see sometimes on certain fonts, but this guy is executing the script, but loading all of the variables and functions into your current session. So let's see that in action here. We dot source this file, and I run this command, and I get, hey, there's my function executing. Perfect. Now, one trick that actually isn't very commonly known is that you can actually call import module on that script. So I kind of prefer this over dot sourcing, mostly because this is very easy to see, whereas that dot kind of hides from you at times. So here's effectively the same function. I'm going to do an import on him. And my verbosity kind of shows me that the module's loaded. And when I execute my command now, I get my info to command. So what this changes though is he's no longer loading everything into my current session. He's actually packaging all of the functions effectively as a module. So if I run get module, I can actually see this script listed as the one where I'm getting where my commands are coming from. And it's basically using the PS1 name. So the big difference, like I said, is my functions are packaged as a module, but if I had some just like variables sitting in the open scope, those wouldn't be imported into my current session. So there's kind of a nuanced difference there. But overall, I'm generally doing import module when I have a floating PS1. And that actually takes me to the next step is like, we've effectively got a module here. All I have to do is change the name of it. So if I actually just rename pretty much the same file, PSM1, that includes all the scripts that I want ran. Like I said, it's just this very basic function. But with that name PSM1, he is now officially a module. And I can call import module on him. And if I execute him, I see that he runs. If I call get module, I actually see now he's still a module of script type. And it's actually identifying my exported commands from that module. So that's actually how the basics of building a module is effectively that, right? Just placing functions into a file and calling it PSM1. And if you got these large scripts that tend to have like a handful of functions defined at the beginning of them, so your overall script is getting to, 500, 1,000, 3,000 lines of code, literally just moving those functions out into this third file that you do an import on could actually make that a little bit more easier to work with and understand. Export module member. Okay, so sometimes your modules might have more functions, might have lots of functions, but some of them are intended for just internal use only. So let me take a look at this example, my fourth module here. And here I've got the same basic function, but I've included some arbitrary function that's intended to be like internal logic. And at the end of it, this PSM1, I'm defining the export module member function as saying export the get info command and don't export this one. So that effectively makes this a private function that only this module knows about. So I can call it in here, but nobody else will be able to call this function. So sometimes you get some really ugly functions that are that is truly internal logic that shouldn't be leaked out. You can, in a way, hide them inside your module this way. And so let me run this guy here. So we'll see that my getinfo4 runs as expected. But and I can see if I get module information, that only that one command is exported. But if I try to run the one that wasn't exported, it's just not going to find it. It just does not exist in my current scope. Now, there is a little bit of a hack to actually execute private functions. I don't do this in the wild very often unless I'm building tests where you can actually call, and this is from Pester, in module scope, basically saying inside this module, run this script block, which has happened to call this command. So even though this author intended that I should never see or access this function, there are ways you can kind of like reach in there and and access stuff if you really, really have to. Generally in testing is the only scenario I tend to use that for. Occasionally, if I have a module that's doing some weird caching stuff, like they're like caching an endpoint or a set of data, I might need to, reach into the internal logic a little bit. This in-module scope is kind of that magic button to allow that. All right, folder names for modules. So if you actually place your scripts inside a folder with the same name, so like this info5 and the PSM1 is matches identically to the folder name, you can do your import module on just the folder itself. It'll actually find the module based off the naming as long as those two pieces match. So like here on my 05, I actually have them matching. And when I run my import and call my command, it automatically discovered it and is able to run. Oh yeah, okay, so if you're not aware, there's this environment variable for the PS module path that defines the list of locations that PowerShell will look to import a module for automatically. Like up here, I'm actually specifying the full path, at least to the folder of the modules I want imported. But if I want some auto loading magic to happen, getting the module in one of these locations, I'm going to run this here to show you what mine has, is where it'll look. Now by default, like now I've installed some stuff that's added locations to my module path. So I have like, what, 6 or 7 here. But I think the default list is effectively the documents folder. And this does change slightly if you're on PowerShell 6 versus 5.1. So if I open up 6.2 here, let me do the splits. As long as I type this correctly. It actually says documents PowerShell instead of Windows PowerShell, or I see, can I zoom in like this? Yeah, so 5.1 will say Windows PowerShell in a lot of these paths, Windows PowerShell. But up here in 6, they've kind of dropped the Windows name. So they actually just say PowerShell modules. So there's a location difference in where modules are stored between 6 and 5. But the important detail is the PS module path will always tell you where it's going to load from. And there's generally 3 locations by default on 5 where it's basically in your My Documents, that's like the user scope. There's program files, which is where for all users, the system scope, or the all users location. And there's a third spot in 5, actually in the System32 folder, that's generally recommended. Don't touch or add modules into this folder. And there's some old hacks of old code where you had to do that, but on a modern PowerShell, you really shouldn't be in the System32 PowerShell modules. I generally prefer installing stuff to my local user scope, unless it's on, I actually need everybody to access it. So here's like installing from the gallery, right? If I just do install module, this depends on scope all users. Actually, let's call this guy current user, because I don't think I'm elevated in this session here. This should, oh, you know what I need to do? PS gallery, let's do this real quick. I've got multiple repositories on this box, so I need to tell it which gallery to look at. And this should install. So this is how I'd load from the gallery. But if you're doing your own module development, you pretty much just have to drop it in one of those folders. So here's a sample where I'm just copying like an 06 info to my Windows PowerShell. I think I'm on 5.1 right here. I am. So this will work. So let's install this module. I'm using splatting here. Hopefully you guys have seen this before, but basically this hash table maps these values to the properties of this command. It's a nice, easy way to keep my code clean here. So if I do get child item here, there's probably gonna be a large list of modules. In fact, I've got quite a bit installed, many internally, but I should see in here, right at the top, the 06 info. So I've now installed this module for my current user. And if I call get module with that name, I'll see them listed. And the beauty of actually installing them in those known locations is we can now auto import our commands. So just by calling this, it will actually load the module for me and execute this command. So I don't necessarily need to say import module. If I just, in general, if I just call the command, it should discover and import and do the import for me. If you're having issues with that, there is the PS module auto loading preference, which actually controls that behavior. So I think on most modern OSs, it's set as all. And I can't remember what version this was included in, if it was like 3 or 4. But I've had some older server OSs that I think the default is none. So it basically, if your auto importing isn't working, it's actually this preference variable that controls it. Module qualified, I've never seen anybody use it, but it effectively means you need to use the syntax where you say module name / command name, and we'll auto load those. We probably, the community probably should leverage that more than we do, but it's kind of like a lost syntax, and I generally only.
Hey, Kevin,
Yeah.
with version 5 and up, since you have version capability, can you put the version number in there when you're fully qualifying it?
Ooh,
You know what I mean?
I don't know. That's a great question. Can I version?
It'd be nice to be able to load a specific version if you need to. With the
Yeah. No, I'll make a note for me to chase that down later. I think it's just the name and the command, and it will, in that case, load generally the most recent version. But yeah, I have no idea on that one. Okay, and then shifting gears to the module manifest. So far, I've done everything that I've shown you with just the PS M1 file, right? Like that's a script file that just has PowerShell as the contents. They've added a module manifest to add a little bit more like metadata about your module. So here, if I actually call, I think I've got, what we got here? All right, so in my demo, I've got just this PSM1. So I'm going to call this command here to add the PSM1 for me, the PS data file. And now, if I run this command, I'll get the import and everything will execute as needed. But when I crack this guy open, we're going to see in this file, can I just do this maybe? This auto-generated file that says, hey, here's some metadata information about who ran this and when. And the root module and version are, I think I specified this. Let me look at my command here. So I specified the root of the module. So I actually need to tell it where the PSM1 file is. And This is a default version in here. It'll auto-generate a unique GUID for you. I think generally, like once you've created a GUID for a module, you shouldn't change it. So like if you're doing new version numbers, just leave your GUID alone. And the author, so there's some general information about your module. If you want to add a description, like there's a spot here for demo module to add descriptive text. And as I scroll down in here a little bit deeper, there's this field on like functions to export. This would effectively replace calling that command export module members. It actually has parameters aligned to all 4 of these. And it's kind of funny, like by default, it generates it with like these stars in place, but literally gives you this comment, hey, for performance reasons, so I kind of wrap this here. It's saying that you shouldn't do that. Like the best practice here is to actually, so the star will export everything, but that kind of causes PowerShell to have to load your PSM1 file and parse it to figure out what to export. And it can, auto-loading will do some weird stuff sometimes. So the general recommendation is that, hey, this guy should either be an empty array or you actually give the list of functions in here. In fact, I think I have that in my next sample here. Yeah, you should actually put in the actual name of the functions, like getInfo8, and use empty arrays for these other items to get optimal performance here. And I think PowerShell 6 might have addressed that. I can remember the discussion, but I don't remember the outcome. But it's supposed to, I think we'll have this as a default in the future. All right, so I was showing this manifest, and when I look at him now, actually he loads, it executes, I see my module. If I actually look at him, I should see, yeah, so my function export are actually defined in here. Now there are other properties in here that matter more if you start publishing to the public gallery. Like the tags, if you want to specify if it's supported on the desktop edition or .NET Core, or your company stuff. I think, I do all my company tags, internal modules. I actually have, Loan Depot listed in here. I don't really tend to utilize that for much. When it does come to the public gallery, the license URI, I think is required. Maybe the project URI. I think these 2 need to be specified to basically the GitHub repository, or it'll complain on publish. And I'll talk about publishing here in a minute. But, okay, so that's my PSD1. Some other properties that are worth knowing is that if you can add a required modules, like one of those properties in here is required modules. Right here, it's commented out. But what I do with that is, so if my module requires Active Directory, I'll list it in here. And I believe if your auto loading preferences are set correctly, it should import the Active Directory module before it loads this module. And I actually had to do that in a few of my commands. So this guy here, if I run him, yeah, here's one where this internal module of mine, this LDX set, requires this module and this module to be present in the environment when he loads. One other nice feature of this is when you publish to a repository, or basically when you install from a repository like the PS Gallery, if they listed a required modules, it will install those modules for you from that same gallery. So that's a nice way to kind of bundle stuff together, if you will, without having to actually have people individually download, multiple things.
Hey, Kevin, we do have one question from the web.
Sure.
The question was, what font is he using on VS Code?
Oh, my font is, I can remember the name of it. User, show me the code.
Music. I can see it on my phone, but like you, I don't see it in the window. I'm not sure exactly what I'm missing, but hopefully we can get that.
Fiera code. I think I downloaded that one. It's an open source one, I believe. So some of the nice things about it is it makes certain things in code really easy to read. I don't know if that's kind of what they were noticing. You will see some things, just going off on this tangent, that it will it'll convert certain commands into other easier to see at a glance symbols.
Nice.
Yeah, so there's lots of little things on there, and I think especially the backticks are a little bit more easier to read than they would be otherwise. Like that's quite a bit bigger than you probably see in like the ISE.
Yep.
So I think it's designed for coders. Like it's just ease of eyes at a glance, cleanliness.
One more time. What was the name of it?
It was
Fiera code.
Fiera code.
Okay.
I'll just drop that in here just so we don't lose that reference later.
Okay. I'll go back on mute. You have a question down there?
Yeah, question.
Okay, wait a minute.
Sure.
You were listing dependent modules. Have you ever had to specify a version for a dependent module, and how, if so, how would you do that?
Did you got the question right, Kevin?
Yeah, I heard the question. So doing where is it? There's a special syntax, so you can do just the name. So there's a special syntax where you can actually put, I'll have to hunt it down later, but it's something similar where you put in like a hash table. I think you say like name equals LDX set. I don't have autocomplete on this, but there you have to hit probably the PowerShell documentation on this, but there's a way to specify a hash table in here with like a 3-part property set that will list, they can specify some version information, but I don't think it's as robust as you want it to be. Like I can't remember if it's like hard code to a specific version or just setting like a minimum version.
I seem to recall that June Blender had a write-up on versioning and PowerShell modules in particular. She went through and tried to vet it and then put some information in the help.
I actually have it.
Do you?
Yeah. It's requires dash modules, and then it's a hash table, and then module name equals, and then the name, and then module version equals, and then the version. Close.
Yeah, like that right there.
There we go.
Yeah. That's
the syntax I'm looking for. So yeah, required version. Okay, it's that specific version. I do want to just say there are just gotchas with that. I can't remember what they are. I've kind of got away from actually leveraging that. I can't remember what trap it was I fell into. Oh, so what gets weird though is when you have like a multiple dependent modules all listing different required version numbers. I think I just had just too big of a matrix internally. Like if I do on my system here, get LD or gets module name LD star, doesn't seem right. Oh, list available. I've got lots of internal modules, and I see some that are actually weirdly imported a couple times. Actually, I don't know what's happening there. But I've had these cross dependencies where requiring versions and yeah. Anyways, I just experiment with it. I feel like there's some weird gotchas with it, but yeah, I see June Blender has a beautiful post here talking about this type of stuff. I will make a note of this and keep it kind of handy in my demo. Version
Any more questions? Okay, I'm gonna go back on mute.
All right. Required module version info. I just want to capture this while I was thinking about it. Okay, so this is for external modules. There's also a property called nested modules for modules that should be, they're either inside your current module or that you basically need to load inside your module scope. That second comment's kind of weird, but focusing on just internal modules, like I have some modules that are like hybrids where I have a binary compiled component. So I have some commands that are compiled commandlets, and I have other commands that are straight up PowerShell, and I want that hybrid nature, and I'll actually basically literally have two modules packaged together where one imports the other. Sorry, was there a question at your end?
Yeah, it was Tom. Did you do that with Mongo? Because that's what I had to do. I was just curious. MongoDB? I saw you had a module for that.
With MongoDB, but it was so actually my example here, I have this module called depends on. I'm referencing it without talking about it, but he allows me to specify dependencies in a list of data and then sort based off those.
Oh, cool.
So if I do gets help depends on examples. The idea here is I can have this hash table of this like family tree, or say the girl depends on dad with these properties, and I want to actually sort stuff based off their dependencies. So if I could actually execute this guy here, PS custom object. Like, I kind of sort it so that I suppose this one, the oldest came first based off of the generations. So basically, like, kind of your DSE resources, if you ever want to like have some resources and sort them effectively based off of what depends on what, this module does that. Now, the clever, I suppose, I built this thing for raw performance because I felt like I'd be using this in a lot of places that I needed to be fast. So I actually built the internal logic as a C# module, actually as a C# DLL that exports some code, and I have a friendly script function in PowerShell that interacts with it. So I kind of let the PowerShell do the stuff it's best at, like using script blocks and things, and actually call into C# to do the heavy lifting. But long story short, I basically have two modules, and the external one nests the child one. And this keeps it inside this module so nobody else externally sees it. So you would, it's basically, I was talking about private and public functions before. I kind of wanted whatever's in this module here, this depends on, to be private. and nobody else see it. Now, you can also nest external modules, but you can get some weird effects sometimes. And one of the weirdest nuances with nested modules is actually, can I do get module? Depends on. I think there's a flag here. You can say all, and the all will show you the nested modules. So this guy here, that zoom didn't work very well, but my binary module is nested inside the script module, and I couldn't see it until I did this all. So there are some, what I don't like about the nested module is it does hide it from get module even. So if you're getting some weird results with, where you think you have modules loaded multiple times, remember using this all flag will actually show you the depth of everything that's listed and loaded for your current session. The one place I run into needing to see what's going on here is when I'm doing testing with Pester. Like I could probably do a whole, I mean, I actually do have whole talks on Pester itself, but there's a couple of features where if you have two versions of a module loaded, it's going to complain. And I've used this all flag to troubleshoot to see, why it thought there's two things loaded. Okay, so in fact, I've actually pop open this script. I mean, this is the example I copied from, is this nested module loads this binary DLL from inside itself. And that's the one place I still use the depends on that way. So, and kind of like I say in this, required modules is just like the requires, it uses the same syntax. In fact, this requires as modules supports that same hash table syntax that we looked up on June Blender's article. So if you have a general script that needs to have a version module, this would support this. And this is also an array, so you can list multiple ones. And the gotcha is requires needs to be the first line in your script, effectively. If it's inside the body, it's not going to process it properly. Okay, so shifting gears a little bit, I want to talk a little bit about some module building patterns. So I've shown quite a bit here, like the pattern of having, one PSM1 file with all your stuff in it, or having like a file with the data file next to it. But when you get I suppose more serious development or larger projects, a really common pattern is having a single file for every function, but then you create a build script to generate just a single module or that kind of combines everything together. Quite often, in fact, let me crack this guy open here. I think the structure of this project, really what I want to show you here, it's where I have, so this TFVC is the root of my module, and in him I have a folder called public with every function being its own file. What I like about this is source control. You can actually do your versioning and see what's happening with an individual file. What I also like about it is it's easy to move a function between one module and another. Like if I have just a generic utility function and it gets too big, I can grab a section of functions in bulk and just move them into a new module pretty easily. To make this work, I need to use a module loading script inside the PSM1 that should look Like here's a sample in pseudocode here where the development PSM1 file will walk through all the subfolders, and then down here we dot source basically every child script inside of it. So using this trick, it will walk the subfolders, load all those modules or functions into my module, and it'll feel like from the user experience that all of those functions were embedded inside the PSM1. So I do kind of say, like, for development, I really love having this loader because it also helps in the debugging experience, right? Because since I'm dot sourcing each file, the debugger in the ISE and in a VS Code will let me step into the files and make changes right where they are on disk. But I also call it for the development experience, the optimal end result, though, is actually still a PSM1 with everything inside of it. And that's why I introduced the idea of having like a build script that for development, I do the import for every file. But when I'm publishing or done, I kind of do the same trick, but instead of dot sourcing and importing it, I effectively am saving it to a file in the project with the like PSM1 syntax file extension. So my end output result is a single file with all of my PSM1s in it. Do I have this guy built already? I don't. I do. So I have like in source the structure. If I go to my output, all I have is a single PSM1 file with all of my functions and code in here for the end user. Now, the true reason why you tend to have that compiled one is performance. If the PSM1 file has to load every function, not only is that a unique disk IO hit, it's also like the AST engine has to like reparse and process that file. And it's just more expensive than you think it should be. So the difference is I'm loading one file and parsing it once, or I'm loading like, 5, 10, 30 files and doing unique parsing on each one of those. That overhead actually does increase pretty fast. And you'll start noticing that your shell just starts loading slower the more modules like that tend to get loaded on your system. So while this is probably the more current pattern, there are a ton of modules in the gallery that basically ship with a PSM1 loader that's doing the per file import, because it still works. It's still a valid module, but like I said, there is this performance hit of loading, dot sourcing every file every time versus having this combined file. And in this script, I'm not diving in too deep, but it's a sample of loaders that I use. I think my current one has gotten quite a bit more complicated, mostly because I'm doing special logic for classes. The classes in PowerShell are kind of their own monster and beast of nuances. But as long as your module is pretty simple, this should work just fine. I've talked a little bit about public versus private functions. Showing a module where I do that quite a bit heavier, make heavier use of it, is this guy here, where I've got these functions that make no sense outside of my module. I list those as private. Like get my LD data types, do some internal conversions. I don't want anybody calling these things directly. But then my public ones is what I'm actually exposing to my users. And I actually have quite a bit. I try to just have stuff, public where I can. But this is the pattern that you'll see in pretty much all the modules that I put together of a dev PSM1 loader, public, private, and a classes folder if I have classes. And then quite often I'd like a data for like odds and ends. I don't know what.
So then when you do your build then of the full module set, you add the private ones in that private block you were explaining earlier? Is that what you're doing?
So actually what I do is I basically concatenate everything, all my classes, my private stuff also gets concatenated into that PSM1 with the public. So I'll have
Right.
one file that has all three of these things.
Okay.
And it's actually my PSD1 file that specifies the functions to export here that just runs on forever on this module. But I will only list the public functions in here.
Oh, instead of using the other one that you showed, what was the other one called? The internal or something where you're referencing the DLL? What's the one that you had with the DLL?
Yeah, and I still make use of the functions to export, even with that DLL. The DLL in that case isn't
Okay.
actually presenting any functions, but I do gate everything still. So if it's public, I list it in this functions to export, and because I have a build script, I can actually build this on the fly. Like, because I literally have a folder of what's public and private, I add a step that basically walks this list. And if it's not in the functions to export, I basically modify the file and add that to the list. That way, when I add a new function, I don't have to think about remembering to go edit this file. And as soon as you have a build, you can start adding other little tricks and things in there to help you out, because like I said, you've already got this process running that needs to perform actions. What else do I got here? Oh, this guy here. Oh, so another pattern, I don't know, a pattern that I've used, I don't know if it's like a common one or not, but I have this TFVC is for like TFS source control management, like creating branches, managing code, merges, things like that. I use TFS quite a bit here, so I built a module for it. And it actually has a pretty hefty chunk of NuGet libraries that I didn't want in my main module, because I'm doing a lot of dev work on this guy. So I'm releasing version after version after version, and my libraries aren't changing. So I don't want to have this like, what is it, like 10 megs downloaded every time I do a revision here. So the one way I accomplish that is if I look at my manifest on this guy, on the PSD1, I do the required modules. So I effectively moved all of my library files into a second module. So these guys always work as a pair. And if I actually look at my libraries module itself, he is using required assemblies to load all the DLLs for that project. And I think my PSM1 is effectively on the output and not doing anything. So this library module, its sole purpose is to package and load these DLLs without me having to have something that's like looping through a folder and doing add type or some other, I don't know. I mean, this is still a hack, if you will, but this felt a lot cleaner than the other things I was looking at, because this project, you know, the TFVC was, you know, it's ugly to work with in general, and I didn't want to have to download hundreds of these copies of these DLLs. In fact, if I do find module TFVC, I want all versions on repository This guy public? I think this guy might be public. PS. Yeah, he is. Gallery. So when this guy, I was actually picking up a bit more than that. Is he internal first? DevOps. I must have actually cleaned this guy up since I haven't. I'm actually purged all the old versions, but I had this intent where this guy got revved quite a bit. I didn't want to have all these things downloaded with it. Let's see. And then binary modules. I don't know if any of you guys are, like dipping into C# at all to actually build some compiled commandlets. But I have the commands here to basically build a binary one. So if I create a new project, and let's step into this folder. So I'm going to call .NET new. So I got to have like the .NET Core SDK, and I'm going to here install a template for the PowerShell standard module from the NuGet. And then I'm going to create a new module, do a restore and a build. So this should create and build a module. Let me just do one step at a time here. Restoring packages. Let's create a module. So I created these files. Let me actually open these up and look at them here. This is 09. There's a lot of, so we got the CS project and the test sample commandlets command. So without diving too much into what a binary commandlet looks like, right, I effectively have, basically have a couple classes here that are the commandlet, but it's literally just a C# file with some CS project information, including this library, which that template just took care of for me. I don't have to think about it or worry about it. And our commandlet was called test, where is it? Test-sample commandlet. That's the syntax they use for specifying the name. So when I build this, .NET restore to make sure I have any dependencies loaded, and then build it, cross my fingers. All right, no errors. I should be able to reach in and import this module just by calling the DLL directly. That was in the build output. If I look at the bin here, there's this DLL here. So I just call import on him. And I do my get module. We'll see he's a binary module, and he's already exporting these commands. And then we looked at the code already. And then we call this sample. And it actually calls and returns basically the same input that was specified. Anyways, and that's the sample that comes with that template. So you can kind of like modify it from there to kind of go off on your own direction. And I've talked about it already, but like I said, my depends on uses this idea of having some code in C# and some in PowerShell. And I use the root module and the nested modules to manage that, with the nested module loading the binary part of it. Publishing, close some windows here. So I'm going to set up a quick gallery real quick to show publishing these modules, and make sure this guy loads cleanly. So I'm creating a local repository off my C drive as if it was like on a network share That's the easiest to set up for like testing and demos. If you have a NuGet feed, like if you actually use like .NET work already, you can piggyback off that or set up a NuGet server. But let's just register a repository called my repository. And if I see my lists, I actually have my repository is trusted because we said trust our code. Source location and publish location should really always be the same. And if I go to publish a module, let's see, this guy's going to fail for some reason, I think. But let's try publishing him anyways. I think, yeah, this is the module I installed, but I didn't create a PSD1 for him. So there are some stricter requirements when we actually go to publish a module to a gallery, any kind. One of them is the PSD1, the data file needs to be there. The gallery checks that the author is set, and those other URLs are identified. But let me install my publish my local module to it by name, just to get something in my gallery. And then if I do find module, I'll actually see that my repository has them. And then the install is just repeating the same thing. This guy might fail because I actually ran this command once. No, do not. And then, so there's like just simple like publishing and loading internally. If you actually do want to publish to the PowerShell gallery, you'll have to sign up to their webpage. It's pretty painless. You'll get an API key, and the publish command actually has a NuGet API key property that you'd have to specify. But yeah, it's actually pretty painless to publish modules. And I mentioned like having a build script to compile my final module with everything inside of it. I have a follow-up step that just auto-publishes that. So you start talking or thinking about like continuous integration or continuous delivery. You can have a script that says when I check in my code, run the build, run my tests, have that final module structure, and just go ahead and publish it to the gallery. That's kind of how I like to set up my modules is I check them in, they get published automatically, and I have something else that's installing the modules where needed. Some odds and ends with modules. Classes they're really great for one thing in PowerShell, and that's class-based DSC resources. The further you get away from using it for just that, you're going to find some other just annoying things to deal with. One of them is they don't cleanly reload between your module imports. So if I try to re-import a module several times, and there are classes inside that module, code in those classes won't always correctly reload in the session. There's sometimes where it feels like it's working, but if you're especially like using them in like function parameter data types, you'll find issues where they don't quite reload as expected. What I tend to do is just reload my session. Like if I'm doing dev work on a module that's either binary and or has classes on it, I'm very quick to just hit, reload window, or come down here and just like close the panel and have it just restart a new session. There are VS Code options to say every time I run my project, like by hitting F5, execute it into a fresh shell. It kind of has its own gotchas to it, but that's an option as well. So just know if you're dealing with classes, just be prepared to refresh your session over and over while you're doing your development work. Another gotcha is that you may have to actually load classes in order. So so my loader and my build was walking the folders and concatenating or loading everything at once, well, you might have projects where the order of the classes actually matters, and the order they are in the folder won't be that order. So you'll probably just have to write a custom script to say, load these in this order specifically. I've written some really fancy logic in some of my projects to just account for that. But as long as it's simple, it might be just easy enough to say, hey, load these 3 classes first and then everything else. And the order is important when you're doing more advanced features like inheritance, where you have one class can be comprised of or inherits from a second one. But I'll leave that off into just know you start using classes, there's lots of gotchas to deal with. And then on the same notes, exporting classes or accessing them outside of the module is kind of ugly, but you can use that in-module scope command I mentioned early on for executing code inside of a module as a way to reach in and do tests. Do I still have one of these up? LDX set. Here, if I have any tests, I'm kind of going off script here. I don't have the test I was looking for, but any test I'm dealing with classes, I'm doing like an in-module scope thing to say inside the module run the test, and then you got lots of flexibility for working with the classes. Just outside of it, not so much. Binary modules, like I mentioned, having to reload the session every build. And actually, one of the nuances here is that your DLLs actually get locked. So if I have one session open that locks a DLL, I can't in another window delete it, because as long as this window is open where I ran the command, that binary module is just pinned to the system and I can't delete it. And on that note, you can never unload it. So you can only have one version of a binary module loaded for any given session. Just one of those nuances, but you just definitely have to be aware of when dealing with binary modules. Other fun stuff is the global scope inside of a module. If you use script scope anywhere inside your PSD1 or your functions, that's actually effectively global scope for the module. So just know that you can use values in script variables to share information across. Quite often, if I'm doing like caching of data, like where I get something and I need that results for a period of time, the script scope variable is a place where I'll shove that data. And then one trick I do quite often is I'll define a PS module root inside all my modules so that I have a reference to the root of the module, very much like I do like the PS script, like you probably are already using PS script root 4. And this is valuable when you're doing things like, sorry, I jumped to the wrong window there. If I'm referencing something inside like a data or a resources folder, I'll reference it in my code and functions via my PS module root. And the thing driving me to do this is because in my dev version, like I have that public folder with all my functions in it, but when I'm compiled, the functions are actually in the PSD1 file, so they're actually in 2 different locations. So I really can't have something that says, like in my function, if I try to doing something like, go up a folder and access it, when I get compiled, I need something that says, actually, I'm in the same folder. Like, because I'm doing my compiled step, I need a common thing that says, this is the root of the project to reference stuff. So I use this quite often when pulling in data and reference files. And one nuance you might run into if you're using Git is that the PSD1 file will get created as a Unicode, like UTF-32. Like Git tends to think your PSD1 files are binary. So if you ever do like a Git difference and you see like all kinds of just garbage characters on your comparisons, it's an encoding problem, and basically Git just doesn't understand it. So I tend to change the encoding of my PSD1 files to a UTF-8. I think this is a non-issue with PowerShell 6 and newer, but PowerShell 5 by default and Git just don't play well together. And this is my hack for getting around that. And let's see here. One common pattern here before I wrap up is quite often I'll create connections. So if I have like a set of commands that are like, if it feels like every command needs to know like a server name and a credential, I will create this idea of a connection where I create like a new connection and get connection commands. And then all my functions will leverage those to use those common parameters. So if I crack open this project here and take a peek again, here's just a random function that like right away, I'm basically saying, hey, get the connection information, which saves me from having to specify. If I run this directly, can I do that? Like if I actually run the command, like I'm actually pulling in an internal, server endpoints and a credential and some other details that for this project, I would have to pass that to every one of these commands. And I honestly just didn't want to duplicate those parameters. So in a way, I created a pair of commands that's basically like close, new, somewhere in here, open connection that will establish my connection, define those parameters, those values, and it's called get connection all over the place. So you'll see that in a lot of my modules, that trick done. And then plaster templates. So you see that my projects have a lot of scaffolding in them. And one thing that can be done to make them easier is to create a template to put your projects together. This one's actually kind of an old plaster template of mine that I definitely need to go back and refresh some things in there. But to show how it works, we can create a new folder. I'm going to invoke plaster with this path, which I've already got copied locally, and this folder name. That when I run this, plaster will ask me questions here. What's the name of your module? I'll just accept the defaults. And accept the defaults, the description. This is a test module. Get repo name, defaults, username, defaults. And it's going to create all these files that I'd want in this project. And if I expand this out, he created all these files here, folder, including the first empty structure of folders and the PSM1. So I don't create all these things all the time by hand. I just run some command to basically dump all this stuff in there. Plaster is kind of a clever tool for just general template work. Like I need to run a command that will generate several files where I can pass in some parameters. Plaster is kind of a good option for that. One thing that I tend to do is, so my issue with Plaster though, like having a template for creating a project, is he's really great for the initial setup. But if over time you tend to make changes to stuff, fix bugs, getting those changes into all your other projects can actually be quite a bit of work. So I've shifted gears slightly, where now I use like a common files repository and actually just clone the files from that repository whenever I make changes. So I can effectively go to my project and say, you know, git pull from this module common files, and he will pull in just the changes that I care about. But what that means is, like, this test framework of mine, if I actually check the remotes on it, you will see, I don't know if you guys use Git much, but let me run that again for the refresh, that the origin is the test framework. So when I do my normal pulls and pushes, I pull the code from there. But I actually create a second reference called module common files that I can do a git pull from that and merge into my mainline branch. I still have to resolve merge conflicts. And the important thing here is to don't like overlap files, like only make changes to your common stuff in the common files and pull them in that way, versus trying to tweak the stuff in here and then trying to push it back up to this guy. Like, just treat this guy as like a pull only source to get changes in. That's one trick I'm currently going down right now. It seems to be working pretty well for me. And this is out on GitHub publicly if you want to see what I'm using in my module structure and files currently. So I guess with that, I kind of open this up for questions. I know I covered a lot of things. So yeah, any questions?
Let me make sure I'm in. Can you hear us? You can, right, Kevin?
What was that?
You can hear us, right?
Yep, I can hear you.
In the beginning of the presentation, you mentioned this GitHub repository where all the held all these demo files in there. Is that going to be posted on your?
What I'm going to do is I'll take what he gives me and I'll update today's session with the links. I'll stick them in. If you look at today's date for July 9th, you'll be able to find the references he has to a session.
Yep. And with that, all of my presentations are out there. So as like even the stuff I presented at the PowerShell Summit, like on, so at the summit, I went into a little bit more about repositories. In fact, that's one of my talks was somewhere in here, PS Graph and managing modules. So here we're actually talking about internally setting up a repository and all of the gotchas and road and landmines, doing it at scale. But I kind of gave you a quick preview in this session. I guess, and on that note, a lot of this content I talked about, I do have posts on my website that touch on a lot of these topics. So here is a list where I'm talking about like continuous integration, continuous delivery, basic repository setups, and building a module like one microstep at a time. Like, this talk was actually pulled pretty heavily from these posts I have about modules.
Are you sharing something, Kevin? Because we can't see it.
Oh, I should be. Are you only seeing VS Code, or are you seeing?
I'm just seeing your face talk.
Oh.
The little logo. That's okay. If you'll send me the links, we're about done for tonight anyway.
Yeah, I'm glad you caught my video most of the time. And then, yeah, I'll send this link in the chat as well.
Okay. Anybody else have any other questions? Go ahead.
The modules for testing, how do you set up the initial build for, let's say you want to share it with somebody internally?
So I guess internally, I mean, so I do have just my own PS repository. I actually have a NuGet feed that I just say, this is my repository. My post on continuous integration, continuous development, I don't know why my screen's not sharing now. I'd love to entire screen. Let's try sharing again. Yeah, I know on my screen. Anyways, so I set up an internal repository. Then I have internally, we use TFS, or if you're using like Jenkins, or there's lots of tools now that could do, we check code in, it could trigger something to happen. And that's where that continuous delivery idea comes into play, right? So when I check in code to our repository, TFS says, hey, I see changes. Let me go run, this pipeline to do stuff. Now, what I like to do is in all my projects, I have a build.ps1. So all the automation does is call that directly with a special parameter for publishing. So I like having a build in the project so that everybody locally can run the same commands that the build server runs. So on my local box, I can call the build, or the server can call the build, and it will do the compilation and the tests, and it will actually stop short of the publish unless I actually pass the parameter in and says, publish module. And partly because API keys and things. So my local devs, they don't have the API keys, and the publish would fail. But in generally, it's all because it's all managed by the PS1 file in the project. I can move it between different deployment systems. So I can jump between like Azure DevOps or AtVeyor or Jenkins, because all I got to do is call the PS1 file. And that's kind of how I kind of package everything up so that they can run the tests. And I suppose the important thing is that does need to bootstrap any dependencies. So if I require a certain version of Pester or some other utilities, that it takes care of those dependencies for me as well. And my current build.ps1 scripts do handle that.
So we do have one question from the internet, which was, you had all sorts of fancy extensions for VS Code. Do you mind sharing what you're using?
Sure. I'm going to reload my window real quick here to see if I can catch my video. So if I lose you, give me a second. Okay, I see video. Do you guys hear me yet? Excellent. All right, screen share. Perfect. All right, so VS Code extensions. What am I in? Am I in? Let me jump in something that's actually got code. This guy here. Boy, I actually do have quite a bit. I suppose the ones I care the most about would be this code spell checker. I think it does a great job of just general spell checking. My spelling is horrible. GitLens. This is probably the superstar as far as plugins, especially if you're using Git. Like if I go back to this project, and as I hover over a line, it shows like the commit message of what happened there. So let me go up a little bit higher here. I don't know if you can see it on the side, but there's this very faint text that was showing up that says, here's my name, a year ago, and that's commit message. But this guy not only does like this inline information on your code, it adds a Git lens over here that lets me see the changes to this file really easily. So here I was just doing some tweaks, changing from, this is some test data, but we changed server name or some names from like dev to dv1. Internal stuff, but I can see that here that this is a change that happened, 4 months ago, just kind of at a glance using this plugin. And it'll do line history and even the product history. So GitLens, if you're not using it, highly recommend that one. The Peacock, this is the one that's actually changing all my title bars of VS Code. you notice as I jump between projects, each one has a unique color to it.
Yeah, I was gonna ask.
And I find that I have so many windows open, I kind of, at a glance, the colors help me remember what I was working on recently. And the gotcha here is like, every time you open a project, it will update this settings.json file in that workspace and add some colors. Like if I actually commit this and save it, that will forever be in that project that way, and it won't generate a random color each time. I don't know. I didn't feel like pushing these colors onto the team. So I just have, these as pending changes. And before I check in, I'll often, discard them. So I have a clean history for committing. But the next time I load that project, it should auto run that plugin and pick a new color for me. So yeah, just because I have lots of windows open. Some people have like all their stuff in like a larger RIP folder. So I have one folder that has, I don't know, 40 some projects in it, but I felt like mine was just getting too slow. So I just do individual projects per repository. And then PowerShell, like that's the number one, like that's everything PowerShell to make it usable in VS Code. And everything else, Twitch chat when I'm streaming, it'll actually add a panel over here on the side that I can expand and actually chat and see comments coming in. It's hard on like full screen to see, chat messages. What else? Markdown linting. I have lots of random stuff in here, but I think those ones I mentioned are the real rock stars that I go to over and over. Walk at time, I experiment like tracking, I don't know, what I do inside VS Code. It's more of an experiment, but it's kind of cool seeing when I'm actually active or not, or how much time I'm spending in VS Code. But yeah, I don't think I've really used many of these other ones so much. I should probably clean my stuff up, but if anything, GitLens is the superstar here. Cool. Any other questions?
Yeah, you mentioned something about control characters in Git for PowerShell 5. Just wanted to know, is that just a carriage return line feed issue?
What was the
UTF-8 format, you mean?
Oh,
Oh,
you great.
You mentioned that when you work with Git, you had some workaround.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
it was changed from UTF-32 to UTF-8, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so what's the project here? Let's see if I... Yeah, so I've got all mine as UTF-8 right now. Where could I find... I could probably have file, open, folder. I'll see if I can find an example here from somebody else's project. Workspace. I don't have that many on here anymore. I've already kind of normalized all of my stuff. So I don't have a good, but what I see is, I guess, can I fake it? Maybe I can fake it real quick. So if I change this guy here, let's save with, actually, let me do this first. Gets checkouts branch UTF 8. Okay. So let me like resave this with encoding. I can't remember what the default is though. Let's just do this guy. So if I actually, I meant to do the PSD1 file. Let me do that guy because he's where I always see the problem. Say with encoding. God, I think is this Unicode? I don't remember my encoding all my let's try this one anyways. Okay. So save this. I'll make some minimal change. And then let's actually commit this guy. So getting it in isn't the problem. Bad encoding. And then if I close this guy and just change him, this. So I go like side by side here. No, I don't want that actually. So we see how it looks like garbage in this file. It just can't tell the difference between those encodings. So the encodings are fine, but Git, and I'm using VS Code here, but you know how to use Git from the command line. And it's Git driven. That's given just, like I said, it looks like garbage. I mean, if you look closely, I can actually see, you know, help, like every other character, you know, default, prefix, for, commands, exported. So it's the same file, but this is what I was talking about where I see it looks like garbage. I mean, it still works. Like you can build it, you can compile it. PowerShell will work with it just fine. But your interaction with Git, I feel, is very painful. Not being able to actually see what your changes are. So that's why I tweak that default encoding to like UTF-8 versus the default of UTF-X 16 or traditional Unicode. So that's what I was referring to right here.
Good. Any more questions? Go ahead.
I think I saw it slide by you on your screen earlier. But I was trying to write my own module. And I wanted to use like the dash credential. But I couldn't figure out how to use like what all the other modules use instead of like reinventing the wheel. I think I saw on your screen somehow you were able to use that in one of your modules.
Yeah. So
Can I see that code real quick?
sure can. I think inside this guy here, I probably have open. So kind of, so here I'm like taking a credential as a parameter, and I've actually labeled it as a PS credential effect. Let me just drop this guy into something real fast so we can actually see it live here. Function tests thing. Actually, param credential, and then credential dots username. So I think if I run this guy, and I call, oh, actually, I think I'm gonna say, I don't care about this. I actually don't care about the other, but let's do, actually, let's see what this does first. I think, I can't remember if I want to do mandatory or not. Did it actually run? Oh, close that. Okay, so test thing. Let's do. What was I doing there? Yeah, sometimes I'll do get credential. So if I don't specify something, it'll prompt. So test thing. right, that looks ugly. Let's try this again. Test thing. So here, because I didn't provide something, executed it. 1, 2, and I get the name back. Or you could actually do credential, or I'm actually doing get credential, which is effectively the same thing, but is it getting passed in versus not? Where else? I'm feeling like you could do. Can I do this? Username. There are some fun nuances you can do. Test thing. Okay, here we go. So here where I didn't, by giving it a string, it's actually smart enough to actually kind of prompt me for the password for it. So that's kind of another hack I've used before where I kind of just need to, like actually the hack is you do TNV username. So this way, if they don't specify anything by default, let's just put this guy down here. He will prompt the person for their password, and they can kind of enter it and continue. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, thanks.
Cool.
Okay, well, I think we need to call it a night. We really appreciate it, Kevin, and happy birthday, by the way. Thanks a lot for spending your day this evening with us. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin.
Oh yeah, thank you.
And congrats on your new position. Hope it all goes well for you.
Yeah, I'm excited. So yeah, like I'm joining Amazon next week, making the move this weekend. So on that note, if you guys are looking for positions, my team has some openings. With me stepping out, they're actually looking to actually bolster their roster a little bit more. The team, actually a really great team to work with. I hate leaving them guys behind. Doing some exciting stuff, but I can't pass up the Amazon opportunity either. So,
You
yeah.
going to work on the same team with Trevor Sullivan?
I've met him.
He's there too.
Okay. Yeah, I've talked with Trevor. I don't think I'm on. So the internal operations team, I think altogether there's like 26, 27 of them split up into teams of like 6 to 9, I guess, or 6 to 8 people. So yeah, I'm not. I've only met part of my team, so I'm not sure who I'll be working with. I know some of those teams are doing some cool stuff, so definitely looking forward to it. But anyways, yeah,